Hello, my name is Gail Strack. I'm the CEO of Alliance for Hope International, and I'm excited that you are joining our session on e-filings, virtual hearings, and what's happening now across the United States. I had the opportunity to invite a number of people across the United States to kind of share that story. As many of you know, I was the first director of the San Diego Family Justice Center. And when we started our center, it was very clear we needed more access to the court to make it less traumatic for victims. So going to the next slide, I want to tell you who's joining us by showing their pictures. First, I'm going to be interviewing and introducing you to Lisbeth Perez. She was a client of the San Diego Family Justice Center and had the benefit of using fax filings at that time, and she's going to share her perspective and even give us some recommendations. I've also invited Suzanne Stewart to join us from Tulsa Family Safety Center. She was part of the President's Family Justice Center initiative, that kind of like the first generation of family justice centers, and a pioneer in trying to approach the court with very new concepts. So I wanted to hear that transition, that journey, and also where is she now and dreams for the future. Catherine Johnson, she's the director of Guilford Family Justice Center. And now they've got a statewide initiative, which I thought was so cool. And then, of course, I've invited Diane Doherty, supervising deputy city attorney at the San Diego Family Justice Center, to find out what's happened now, what are the current challenges, and give you some insight for those of you who are listening who want to start a project. And then, of course, we're going to wrap everything up with dreams, because as you know, we always like to dream big, then start small. But as we're all going through this process, what more should we be dreaming about, asking, and maybe even demanding that we have for our survivors? So let's go directly to Lisbeth. And that's me again. Hi. Then Lisbeth. Lisbeth, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you had the opportunity to benefit from this, but can you share a little bit about your perspective and what that meant to you, to be able to not have to go to court to file all that paperwork by yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me, Gail, and for always giving victims and survivors a voice. Well, I'm a former undocumented victim of domestic violence, and as I walked to the Family Justice Center, all these broad services were given to me, and one that it was just offered and accessible was the e-fax filing, which I had no idea what was it. I had no knowledge at all about the criminal uh, system or the process to obtaining a restraining order. But as being an undocumented victim, there was that additional fear of having law enforcement potentially be connected to immigration and potentially being deported or have my kids taken away from me. So one of the, as I was offered this service was just tremendously helpful for me. And like I mentioned before to you, it was not only physically safe, but it was emotionally and mentally safe for me. And it was just great to have a legal team who was trauma informed and who was able to understand my fears and my anxiety, and also have privacy to share such intimate um, incidents that happened with my abuser was also very helpful. And having that place where I felt safe and my children felt safe, and not having the challenge of transportation or child care for my children, everything was just offered at the Family Justice Center. And I was just so incredibly grateful. And I even had no idea that that was just like an additional service that the Family Justice Center was providing to victims. And I cannot imagine going through that process and having to go to court to file for that emergency restraining order myself. Um, my abuser was a stalker, and I was in high danger, and that would have potentially put my life at risk. So I'm just very, very grateful that that service was just offered and accessible to me at that time.
Well, thank you. And Lisbeth, today I know you're working with a lot of victims and helping them access the court, and you know what they're going through now. So, do you have any recommendations for us as we continue to go forward, things that we should be thinking about as we continue to try to improve the system?
I would just first, I'm just so grateful for this amazing team who is advocating for every family justice center and every county to have this e-filing and video hearings accessible to all victims, because I feel like it's saving the lives of victims, and it's saving the lives of those individuals around the victim, helping them going through the process. And um, just having that service available, not only for the safety, but also having them feel safe to go and file that restraining order, and having a team who is going to help them with safety planning. We've had cases where victims just go to court, file for the emergency restraining order, not knowing, not understanding that that's the the thing that can potentially put them more at risk. We have victims who have lost their lives because they didn't have that supported team around them to inform them and protect them. And it's just something that needs to be done if we want to move forward, if we want to protect victims, if we want to protect children and their families in our communities, and just don't have that barrier of fear of going to law enforcement and ask for safety. We have to do that. And I'm talking from an immigrant perspective, but also uh, from the brown community. I think there's a lot of fear, and it's just the um, ethical thing to do, since we know it's what is safe for victims and that it actually can work. Now we're seeing it with this pandemic. We've seen that it can happen, and it's something that we can do. So let's do it.
Well, I like that. And you framed all of the issues as to why beautifully. Because when I started at the San Diego Family Justice Center, we were so excited to be there. It was a dream come true. We were planning it since like 1988, finally got to open it in 2002. And in our focus groups and in our exit surveys, immediately victims said to us, we need a better way. Because we started to find out it took them all day to get a restraining order before we had this process. And sometimes it would take several days by the time they got all the paperwork in place and got somebody served. So there were so many different reasons. But thank you, Lisbeth. What I'm going to do now is go to Suzanne. Suzanne Stewart, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And I too would love for you to share the journey of where it started, because you too had to start something new. Was it quickly received? What were some of your challenges? And then tell us the benefits.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks, Lisbeth, for sharing your story. Yes, we listened to a lot of people like you, Lisbeth, in terms of how we were going to set up our programming. And of course, San Diego was the role model for all of us back in that day. It was 2004. We were really looking at how we could maximize the small amount of space we had, and the fact that we were in a remote location from our county courthouse, where most victims had to go to file for their petitions. So we set up the video court. We had to get, in our case, the state of Oklahoma Supreme Court had to approve that process. And we still had to have a wet signature on all of the paperwork. So we used fax, we used scans. The victim would join us in our video court, where we had a camera set up in the judge's chambers, and he would meet with each of the victims. Normally took no more than 3 or 4 minutes to hear the story, to make the decision, and then we would continue offering services while they waited to receive their petition. Um, the pro se hearings were still done 2 weeks later in person at the courthouse. Now today, we have since relocated closer to the courthouse. The petitions are not done by video court anymore. They are actually done by affidavit attached to the petition. So victims don't even have to see a judge for the initial emergency protective order. They agree on the affidavit that what they're saying is true. The judge reads the petition, all of the dialogue, all of the story, all of the incidents within the four corners of the document, issues the decision right then and there, and then they come back to us and we distribute them to the clients who are waiting and are able to get services while they wait. In Tulsa's case, we have about 14 different jurisdictions, I think, in the Tulsa County. We serve all of Tulsa County. And so each law enforcement agency has their own process. But in our case, we were able to have civil orders served by the Tulsa County Sheriff's Department. And that deputy, Wayne Pauley, who was with us then, and one of the founders of the Family Safety Center in Tulsa, is still with us today.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
he's still serving protective orders. And I have to say, he and his team, there are about 4 officers that are serving, I think 24/7 now. And Wayne is the guy you call if you can't find somebody or they don't want to be served, and he's able to talk them into wanting to be served. So we feel like that partnership has been something that's really helped us out a lot through the years.
So when I met Wayne, he was so proud of the fact that he had like a 98, 99 sort of service rate. And then he was also very proud to say that he could serve someone, I think within 12 hours or less. And then you had the ability to let the victim know that he had been served. So can you say a little bit more about having that particular piece on site?
Sure. We had the state has a program called Vines, and once a petition is served on the offender, that goes into a database, and that information is immediately available. So either the victim, the survivor, can contact Vines and get that information, or we're able to let them know immediately. So all of that data is available for them, and we're able to get in contact with them to let them know the service has been done. I will say right now with COVID, we are still at the petition process, but the pro se hearings, rather than being in person, are all done by video court, actually through the Blue Jeans application that the state Supreme Court has approved for courts to use for their dockets. And so most of the pro se hearings for protective orders now involve either computer or smartphones, where a victim and the offender can both get on a line. If their attorneys can get on a line and talk with the judge and present their case to the judge via the app. So today, that Blue Jean app is the way most of those pro se hearings are going forward. I'm not quite sure what the future of that's going to be. Most of the criminal dockets and some of the misdemeanors are all being done by that same application. So I think what has happened is that while judges still deep down in their hearts want to have that, I want to read your body language, I want to see your face, I want to know you feeling, the technology that is available to us now through video camera capability is just as great as if you were in person, so that you can see those nuances, you can experience those things. And I think we have set the stage for being able to allow that stuff going forward.
That's awesome. You know, when we started our program, we didn't have the ability for FaceTime, Blue Jeans, or anything else. It was fax filings by affidavit. And what we were able to negotiate is that we would have our clients available if the judge had any questions. So they would talk to them on the phone to answer any questions. And you know what? All during that time, we didn't have those phone calls. We knew what the judges needed. And so it does take time. Takes a lot of meetings, working out all of the bugs and procedures, and finding out what everybody needs in order to make this process a lot easier and much simpler. And one of the things I did early on, which I would recommend as advice, I went through the process myself. I had never been to civil court at that time, and I realized how intimidating it could be, because at that time, the courthouse was very small. There was just one way in, a very intimidating process with all the security and all the machines. And then there was only one elevator where everybody had to go in up to the third floor, and then it was a very narrow hallway. And I witnessed, because no one really knew who I was, a tremendous amount of witness intimidation
Mhm.
happening right outside the courtroom, and the court wasn't even aware of it. And I kind of reflected because I felt that there was almost more witness intimidation in the civil courtroom than I ever saw in the criminal courtroom. And I kept
Exactly.
processing that. I go, why is that? And in some ways, in the civil side, they haven't been held accountable yet. So they're still trying to intimidate somebody for letting others know, and also to try to put some boundaries on their behavior. So,
Interestingly enough, we led a team that did an assessment of our protective order system. We assessed the whole system from the time 911 is called until you hit your pro se hearing. And we had 25 team members who looked at every aspect of the process going down the boards. We found that same situation in our court, Gail, that you're describing in San Diego. This was in 2016. And there have been some changes as a result of that, report. But a lot of it had to do with the physicality and the design of that building and that space, which was built in the 1950s. And today it's a different world. And so as we think about what these processes are going to be going forward, how COVID and how the potential for quarantine has affected society and will continue for the next couple of years. How are we going to be responsive to the needs of the justice system, and in particular, the needs of our survivors, and being able to keep them safe and hold offenders accountable going forward with all of these different things pressing in on us?
so thank you. What I'm going to do now is switch to Katherine Johnson. Katherine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't see your face, but I'm sure you're there. Katherine, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
There you are. Well, Katherine, your situation is a little different. You have a statewide program, but it always starts with one. Can you tell us your story and tell us where you are now?
Sure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for this opportunity and hearing from the leaders that's already have spoken before me. In North Carolina, we've been on a really interesting journey with electronic filing for restraining orders that really was birthed from the Family Justice Center movement here in North Carolina. Alamance County, which is a smaller county just to our east here in Guilford County, had a team of folks that when they first opened their Family Justice Center, and they've been open about 5 years longer than we have, really started thinking and planning about how we could have, if we have one place where survivors are coming for help, why are we sending them to the sheriff and the courthouse and the advocacy agency and to the Family Justice Center? So that community piloted, through the leadership of their chief district court judge, Family Justice Center partners, piloted a phone-based electronic filing for the emergency protective order hearing. When our Family Justice Center was opening here in Guilford County in June 2015, we had a lot of momentum as a leadership team, including chief district court judge, our clerk of court, law enforcement agency heads, nonprofit heads, and sat around the table and said, can we take what Alamance is doing and do it here in Guilford County? And at that intersection, our state was looking to pilot electronic filing for restraining orders in a larger county, just to see if we had the capacity to push this out statewide. So Guilford County, having a Family Justice Center that had literally just opened, was the pilot site that was chosen in our state to launch the state's version of a statewide electronic filing software for filing restraining orders. And that software, similar to what Suzanne was sharing, was just this opportunity to do things electronically, where the survivor could come to one place, work with a victim advocate to fill out the restraining order documentation. That documentation is then electronically shared with the clerk's office. The judge does a virtual hearing with the survivor. Typically, the judge is either in chambers or in the courtroom, and video cast over here to the Family Justice Center. And then the survivor meets with the sheriff's office civil process unit, who is also housed here at our center. Some great things that came about from that is that when we started using technology, we could communicate with other counties more easily. Survivors had those tools that restraining orders provide, both in a paper form and an electronic form. And because of the success we had here in Guilford County, the state said if Guilford can do it, so can others. And so they worked on a rollout plan with other counties throughout North Carolina. And one of the things that we were particularly proud of is really looking at communities throughout our state who were co-locating or coordinating services well, like through a family justice center. And that's how it's being built out across our state.
That sounds fantastic. What I want to do, Catherine, is let's drill down on the practical aspect of this. How did you make this happen? What are some of the steps? Did you have to go to the court? Did you have to get other partners? Walk us through that.
So our partnership understood well the process pre doing electronic filing, and some of the Guilford County histories in 2013 and 2014, the 2 years prior to our Family Justice Center opening, we led the state with the most number of domestic violence homicides. When we looked at some of those homicide cases, there were examples of survivors who were going from place to place to place to place all over downtown who maybe weren't getting to the last stop, and so their orders weren't executed or fulfilled. And so we had direct correlation between some survivors who had reached out for a restraining order and were not successful in following through some very complicated processes that we had put in place for them to navigate. When we did an assessment of how long it was taking on average for a survivor who was filing for an emergency restraining order in our county, they had to go 6 different places and it could take up to 8 hours. So the amount of time spent for a survivor going to all of these different locations, in addition, the amount of time professionals were spending supporting a survivor and navigating these different stops along the way, was tremendous on both sides, both for professionals and for clients. So we really used the momentum that the Family Justice Center framework had of one-stop shop or multi-agency services in one place. And so kind of leveraged that for our county. Our chief district court judge took the lead on that and called the Alamance County, who was doing a smaller version, and advocated at the state level. So leveraging our existing partnership and then allowing the courts to take the lead. We did establish local rules between the sheriff's office, our clerk of court, judges, and our victim advocacy agency, in addition to the Family Justice Center. So we had a set of guidelines that we would follow. And initially, we had regular scheduled meetings to say, how is this going? What's working? What's not working? And really creating feedback loops where we would ask both survivors, but also professionals. We needed to make things more efficient for the helper so that the helper would be able to help more people. And so we really worked both ends of that, both the survivor perspective, but also the perspective that professionals were having in helping folks navigate that system.
Okay. So I know what people are going to be asking. They're going to ask for a copy of your local rules and your protocols. Is that something you can share with everyone?
Yes, we'd be glad to share that.
Okay. And so how fast can you get a restraining order now?
So now on average, when someone comes in, it depends on what's going on that day, but it takes about 2 hours and the survivor never leaves the center. They get childcare for their child, they get a snack, they get that immediate connection to the sheriff's office and a civil legal attorney. So from an efficiency capacity, many of our partners who felt strapped and strained when we were doing it the paper way really found that they had more space and opportunity to help more people because that process was just so much more efficient. What's exciting is with COVID, we've remained operational throughout COVID and have had, I don't know, over 3,000 folks come in just a couple of months over the past 5 or 6 months, and have continued doing restraining order filings in this way. But in North Carolina, you return to court 10 days later for that permanent hearing or a year-long hearing. We are now initiating conversations with all of those same partners who helped make electronic filing for those emergency orders possible to begin talking about how we can do that for permanent hearings. So taking our collaborative work to the next step, we feel that COVID, while it has been certainly challenging for all of us, has created some opportunities in strategizing how to use technology and mitigating some of those common concerns that people have named around the reason why we have to see someone in person, or the reason why it has to be this way, because it's always been that way, and have positioned us well to begin having some discussions about extending that emergency hearing to that long-term hearing too, which we feel will be a tremendous benefit to survivors coming into the Family Justice Center.
So I do want to come back to that face-to-face. I hear that issue coming up a lot from judges who are reluctant to go to e-filings or virtual that they want to be able to assess credibility, and the best way to do that is face to face. Can you share some of the discussions you've had related to that?
So very much heard that exact same concern that was shared, and that was a pre-COVID conversation. I think COVID has really restricted the number of people that can be in the courtroom. We've now got a situation when survivors are going back for that permanent hearing. They may be on a back hallway with their abuser, and there may not be a bailiff present. We also know that support professionals have also been reduced in the courtroom, so lack of victim advocacy. So if a survivor gets very upset in the courtroom, the judge doesn't have the advocate to say, excuse me, Ms. Johnson, can you help this client? So they are recognizing the strain of COVID and these restrictions that we're putting in place to protect the health and safety of both professionals and the public. A real opportunity to say, well, is that actually what we need, or is that what we thought we need? And now we have these other compression points. And so how can we look at these as opportunities? And so if we have the opportunity of a family justice center who's a strong ally with the courts and a strong ally for helping survivors, can we leverage these partnerships to alleviate pressure points in other ways, which will be a shared benefit for all of us?
Okay, so Catherine, I'm going to ask you another one because it makes it sound like it's so easy, and we know these new things that you try to initiate in a community is never as easy as you might think. Are there, well, I should say, let me do it this way. I always say that there are keepers, do-overs, and what the heck were we thinking? Are there any do-overs in your process that you wish, now that you know, you could have done it differently?
I think that within all these systems of care within family justice centers, but particularly when we think about electronic filing, the players change frequently. So law enforcement changes or district court judges change. And I think for us, it's really, and this is the core of family justice center work, is relationships, relationships, relationships. And so I have found that there's been intersections where I've asked once and they say no, and I think this is a moved on conversation, then we get to come back to it. So I think keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening and not letting up on that is so important, because it can feel easy to be discouraged when you get a no. And I think one of the strategies that have worked particularly well here in Guilford County is really looking at who's on our executive leadership team and seeing which of those leaders has the ability to get the biggest momentum to get something moving forward. And in our community, it's been the chief district court judge who's led this initiative, and that has been incredibly beneficial for us. I think oftentimes folks on the front line see the solutions, and then the folks at the executive level are kind of navigating that. So if we can bring those two things together through relationship, I think that's so important, just to stay on that and not let up.
Okay, well, thank you, Catherine. Really appreciate those tips, because I'm hearing some themes that have been emerging: the partnerships, the assessment, making your business case, finding someone within the court system that understands these issues and are willing to collaborate and make the courtroom more accessible to survivors. So what I want to do now is turn to Diane Doherty, who is now fighting this battle to try to go back to e-filings. So Diane, welcome. It's really nice to see you in particular, because you were at the San Diego Family Justice Center in 2002 when we opened it up. And you were there when we fought this battle the first time and trying to get our court to be open to, at that time, fax filings, because we didn't have the videos. And we were able to ultimately succeed, but it really had to be their idea. Because I recall when we approached them the first time, they said, interesting idea, but we haven't done it before, and we're not really quite ready to do it now. And then the Family Justice Center started rolling. We had amazing civil legal services on site. We were able to produce restraining order applications. We were sending people to court. And then I think the court realized for themselves that having more people at the court created a lot of challenges even for them, where, just as Catherine said, it was a staffing issue. It was an issue related to witness intimidation. They're starting to see more people. They were processing more. So I think they realized on their own that we needed to find a more efficient way to do it. And so Judge Towers, I remember, called that meeting, and we went there with a we. We went there with our partners, our civil legal partners, our police partners, our advocates, to really explain to them why this was so important. So that pilot project lasted for 10 years, and then somewhere along the way it stopped, and you've been trying to get it back. Can you walk us through the journey that San Diego is going now? Because I suspect many of our attendees who are listening to this are folks who are trying to get this up and running. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you. That's right. Gail, thanks for having me here today. Lisbeth, thank you for sharing your story. And Suzanne and Catherine, your experiences really give me hope and inspire me. So thank you. Yes, so let me answer your question by giving you all a brief rundown of the e-filing efforts that I've been involved in most recently. So in 2017, Mara Elliott became San Diego's new city attorney. And in her first 100 days, she made DV a priority. She said, we're going to increase victim access to DVROs, we're going to expedite their issuance, and we're just going to make this system more victim friendly across the board. So in April of 2017, colleagues and myself, we met with the court to discuss DVRO e-filings, remote hearings, and some other projects that we wanted to work on. And we were given the green light to pursue e-filing. But we were reminded that there was no funding for it. So I immediately set to work and I talked to everyone, judges, court staff, community partners, and I observed hundreds of hours of DVRO hearings. And I can attest to what Lisbeth and Gail have shared about what goes on in those hallways in the court. So in the 3 years since 2017, when I started this, however, San Diego has been a very busy place. It's had lots of exciting projects. We got a brand new state-of-the-art courthouse. We went through a 2-year data transition to a new case management system. This May, the court rolled out e-filing for family court, and then now COVID. So for all but this last point, those advancements in San Diego have been really exciting. So during all these years of changes, I worked on an e-filing protocol. I worked with the clerks and the court staff who were amazing, and we drafted the protocol, we revised it, we tested it. But with all these changes going on in San Diego, our e-filing project kept getting put on hold. So that brings us to today, and today we have COVID. Today the courts are closed, and we in San Diego are having remote hearings for restraining orders. So most recently, the city and the district attorney's offices just last month hosted a meeting with 55 people representing 30 local DV agencies, and we took their pulse. We discussed their interest in e-filings and in remote hearings, and we got complete support from the entire DV community for e-filing, which is huge. And then we discussed some of the kinks of the remote DVRO hearings. And then the following week, we had a meeting with the court to discuss those kinks so that we could start to work them out. Next week, we're having a meeting with the court to continue our discussion for e-filing and to continue the remote hearings after COVID. So onward we push. So many of the lessons that I've learned, and what are my tips, similar to what Suzanne and Catherine have experienced, is you have to be patient. Like it was mentioned, you're working with staff that typically changes every year. And although you're really invested in this project, oftentimes the new court staff doesn't know anything about it, or there's a learning curve. Plus, the court staff is typically overworked, underfunded, and bringing in change can sometimes be challenging. So for us A personality types who want everything done now, we have to remember to take a step back, be patient, and wait our turn. But while we're being patient, that doesn't mean we have to give up. I think we have to be persistent, because e-filing and remote hearings are causes worth fighting for. And although you're told 3, 4, 5, 6 times you need to wait, and that can be demoralizing and frustrating, like some of you have mentioned before me, when you see a batter or mad dogging a victim in the hallway of the courthouse, or a respondent's family intimidating a victim, you know that these are causes worth fighting for. And so just don't give up and stay with it. The other thing that I've learned in my journey, along with being persistent, is that you need to learn to think outside the box, because you're gonna get adversity. You're gonna get hurdles thrown your way. And so you have to anticipate those hurdles, and you have to creatively and collaboratively problem solve with the court staff. So I've often been asked, what are some of the hurdles I've encountered? And I've heard some of them today. So one of the hurdles I encountered, which Gail mentioned, which is interesting, is this disconnect in communication. Gail talked about the Family Justice Center and its experience in beginning fax filing in 2003. And yet when I met with the court in April of 2017, court staff still thought fax filing was happening. And yet somewhere along the way it had stopped, and no one seemed to know when or why. Again, another hurdle I've encountered is that shrinking underfunded court staff. It's an issue that we're all going to face. You know, how do we do more with less? So I think you have to learn when you're rolling out e-filings and remote hearings that you have to work within the confines of the court, because you need court staff to be on board. You need them rooting for your causes. And as far as the hurdles with remote hearings, I've actually been very impressed with San Diego. Like I mentioned, we had that meeting with all the DV agencies. We discussed some of the kinks in the hearings, and then 3 weeks later, we had a meeting to iron out some of those kinks. So again, like Catherine mentioned, you really need the court as your partner, as your ally. And then we've also had the same issues with credibility assessments. The judges are looking for that in-person opportunity to assess people. But in San Diego, we've been doing remote preliminary hearings and restraining orders throughout COVID, and the judges are making credibility assessments every day. So in my opinion, I think virtual credibility assessments are doable and are realistic. But I do think from all of these experiences that I've had that it is important that you need buy-in on all sides. You need it from the court, you need it from the court staff, especially their IT departments, and you need buy-in from your local DV agencies. It's truly a collaborative group effort. And the benefits of these remote policies are huge, and Lisbeth touched on some of that. And so many of you watching this webinar are probably very familiar with some of these benefits. As Gail mentioned in an email prior to this webinar, you know, everyone is either doing it or wishes they were doing it. And that statement is so true. Email filing and remote hearings are helpful on so many fronts. They save time, especially for victims who are hourly wage earners. Every hour they are in that courthouse costs them money. These victims need to get back to work. These remote services help with childcare issues. It breaks my heart when I see a victim trying to file a restraining order in the courthouse and their children are crying, they're there, they're tired, they're hungry. Or a victim can't even go to the courthouse because, like Gail mentioned, after they finally get help with the petition, the victim has run out of time and now they got to go pick up their child from school. So I'm super excited to hear, Catherine, you talking about it taking only 2 hours. Gives me great hope. E-filing and remote hearings also help with transportation issues. For example, in San Diego, we have Campo. It's a town, it's about 60 miles outside of San Diego. It's a 1-hour car ride, and it's a 3-hour bus and trolley ride each way. So someone from Campo, if they could e-file, that would eliminate 2 to 6 hours in transportation in just that situation. I believe that remote services also allow low-income and marginalized victims the same access to the courts. Remote services help non-English speakers. These types of e-filing and remote hearings also will help those who wouldn't otherwise come to court and get the protection they need. For example, Lisbeth shared there are some people who won't come to court for fear of being arrested, perhaps for immigration issues. Some people won't come to court because of health risks, especially during this time. Some people won't come to court because they don't want to be in the same room as their batterer. And right now we know that victims and batterers are stuck at home together under these stay-at-home orders. There's no safe means of escape. And these remote processes can help victims possibly during COVID and beyond to get the help they need. You know, Lisbeth really touched on the fear and the trauma and the confusion and the conflict at the courthouse itself. Think about it. Put yourself in the victim's shoes. You know, where is the courthouse? Where do I go? Where do I park? What do I wear? Where is the courtroom? And then you finally get there and your batterer is there. Oh my God, there's my batterer. Now my batterer is threatening me in the court hallway. Now the batterer is intimidating me. Now the batterer is following me outside the courthouse. And these are all things I hear from victims. You know, a victim goes to the courthouse to get protection, And yet sometimes the very first person they see there is their batterer. So victims are unfamiliar with the legal system. They're in a vulnerable state. There's conflict at the courthouse. So victims get intimidated. They get frustrated, they get lost, and they give up. So remote hearings can offer them that safety, that familiarity. And if the cases are called one at a time, it gives them that privacy, that confidentiality. So the benefits of e-filing and remote hearings are huge. They're so numerous, and we need to make the restraining order process easier and more understandable for victims so they can get the protection they deserve, they can get it for their children. And very simply put, e-filings and remote hearings make the process easier. You know, I want San Diego to be a success story, just like Guilford and just like Tulsa. So I'm so happy to have heard these stories. They give me great hope. And I look forward to continuing this work here in San Diego. Thanks, Gail.
Well, thank you, Diane. I have a feeling you must be a prosecutor because you just did a great job with the closing argument of what are the benefits and the challenges. And I'm going to go to the next question because I think we've covered why, we've covered how, we've covered how you've overcome the challenges. We know how inspiring it is. So let's go to dreaming big. Going forward, what changes or what recommendations do you see going forward? Because I know all of you, you're not going to stop at this is just okay. We want to go and shoot for the moon. So let's start with Lisbeth. Lisbeth, what are some recommendations or what you would love to see going forward?
Moving forward, like I said in the beginning, I would continue to share this passion. I would continue to share these benefits and the challenges with other leaders who are pursuing to have e-filings possible in their cities, in their counties. Sometimes we tend to feel alone and it's challenging sometimes to ask for help. And I just encourage everyone to contact me or any of you guys for advice or encouragement, because I think that's one of the things needed at this moment. We all need a little bit more of extra support, extra encouragement, because it can be difficult. And I want to thank everyone who can take the lead to eliminate all these challenges for victims. And by doing that, saving, not only making the process easier for victims, especially again, coming from being an immigrant and former undocumented, and making it easier for them, making this process safer and easier for them, but also saving lives. This process does save lives, and I cannot speak more to that. And helping those victims in very vulnerable situations, not only immigrants who have the immigration challenge, but also language access challenge. And I'm talking about homeless individuals, homeless victims who end up victims in the homelessness because they are afraid to go to court. So I just want to thank all of you, and I just want to encourage everyone to ask for support and to continue, again, dreaming big and moving forward to one day all of this is available for every victim in every city and county in this country.
Well, thank you, Lisbeth. Because I think the things that every time I talk to you, you're always so conscientious and worried about others, those who we don't see sometimes, like maybe the victim who is homeless. Folks from other communities, could be rural from San Diego. You've talked about family members and making room for family members to be there to support victims. And you just said something too, language. How are we going to continue to make sure that we have the ability to have translators and interpreters in all of these areas? So thank you, Lisbeth. And now I'm going to go back to Suzanne. Suzanne, what have you been dreaming? What are you plotting now? Because you're always working on something.
Oh, I am plotting big. And thanks to Lisbeth and voices like hers, they're giving us the model and the program for us to carry forward. And Diane certainly has most of the legal arguments down pat 100%. As you say, she was a prosecutor, so we've got that. And Catherine's got her good sense too. So I think one of the things that I would ask for people to consider is that, at least in Tulsa's case, judges change out every 3 or 4 years. So just as you get somebody trained up to understand what's going on, they're going to be transferred to another docket. Same thing with clerk staff, same thing with law enforcement, same thing with all aspects. Advocates may stay in their job 2 or 3 years before they get burned out and then move on to something else. So I think one of the things that's really important as we think about the future is to keep in mind the technology that we're going to have access to now and going forward, how we best utilize that technology, but how do we train up our partners and how to not just use the technology, but to apply it specifically to these kinds of cases, because it's a different dynamic than a traditional criminal case or even a family law case. So I think there are a lot of things to keep in mind. And one of the things that we found most helpful going forward that I'm going to continue to implement as we plan for our new facility with new technological equipment and capabilities is making sure that everybody understands what their role in the system is, how it works, because you don't know what you don't know. And as Gail explained in her introduction of going through the process herself, unless you've been through it, you don't understand the hurdles that our survivors are encountering along the way. You don't understand the transportation issues. You don't understand how showing up in court and sitting literally right next to your intimidator and their family is going to affect you and your case going forward. So I would encourage everyone in all of your planning phases just to make sure that there is a role for assessment and for mapping of all of those processes along the way, even if you're going to be including technology in its latest form, and to be sure that you've got the backing of all of those partners. Diane was very eloquent about talking about the benefits to everybody who are engaged in the system, from the judges to the clerks to the advocates to the attorneys to the victims to the survivors, and even to those defendants who are in the courtroom. This is all beneficial to everybody. So keeping that in mind and making those arguments going forward as you plan, I think is going to continue to be really, really important.
Wow, thank you. Those are some great tips. Let's go to Catherine Johnson. What are you dreaming about and plotting as well?
Well, I really appreciate all that everyone has shared and what is coming. And it's really been an active conversation we've been having over the past couple of weeks, is really finding that silver lining during COVID times and using this as an opportunity to reframe how we look at engagement with survivors, engagement with our partners. So for here in Guilford County, I think part of our dream is kind of taking our remote services beyond the emergency, the ex parte and this emergency process, and really looking at these intersections of opportunity to extend this far beyond the emergency for survivors, and seeing the Family Justice Center is that place, whether it is a court proceeding that they're navigating or other resources that were being offered here. So I think part of our big dream is we have fostered and planted this electronic filing opportunity in an emergency capacity in our community and across our state, and really looking at ways we can extend that and make it more comprehensive for survivors long term.
That's excellent. So already expanding the model, because at the beginning, we could only dream as far as the restraining order application, that emergency protection order, that temporary. When we opened up the discussion back then in 2003 to have remote hearings, that door was slammed shut. But I think COVID has definitely opened the door to new possibilities. And so I guess it's our job to open up that window as far as we can and think about those new possibilities. One of the first cases I handled as a domestic violence prosecutor actually involved a strangulation case that occurred during mediation between the parties to try to get child custody in front of the mediator. And I'm going like, if this is not a reason why we need remote hearings, I can't think of a better one when you're still in the thick of things and people are still very upset, full of rage and anger, and that assault happened in the courtroom. So I like that. Keep dreaming, keep thinking, keep expanding. So let's go to Diane Doherty. As you are now getting everybody on board, the stars are aligning. How far or how big will you be dreaming in San Diego?
Well, I'm dreaming huge. So, what I have to say is that victims are more willing to seek the help and the protection they need when they can do it in a safe space, like a family justice center, and in a safe way. So at places like family justice centers, they can go in, they can get wraparound services, safety planning in a trauma-informed way. They're more likely to get help sooner rather than later after more instances of abuse. And I want the Family Justice Center to be a part of this dream. What I would love to see is a Family Justice Center where a victim can walk into it with his or her or their children. They can have access to the petitions and the paperwork online. It can get e-filed. Then they can very quickly get it back from the court. I would love the 2-hour time frame that I heard on this webinar. So then they can get home to their family. And then, in a few weeks later, they can come back to that safe family justice center, sit in a room with an advocate or a lawyer or whomever, have that hearing in a safe space, have that restraining order after hearing faxed back or emailed back to the Family Justice Center, so the victim can leave every time with that protection in his or her or their hand, so that they can feel safe and they can protect their children. So I think that the more options that we can give these victims, the more likely they're going to get the help and the safety that they need. If we can tell a victim, if you don't want to go to court and you want to sit here in this room and have your hearing, then that's your choice. If you want to go to the courthouse and file your TRO application, that's your choice too. But the more choices that we provide for victims, the more empowered it makes victims who are in otherwise powerless situations feel, the more likely they're going to get help. And so I just think that together, this is really a team effort. Together we can do this in San Diego. We have a great DV community. We have a strong DV community. And that's my dream at the current moment.
Okay. So one thing that we talked about with Suzanne, so this is my last one, because I found that once we overcame that challenge of electronic filings, the next big problem we faced was serving the respondent. And it seemed to me if they got a little whiff or knew that the victim was getting a restraining order, they made themselves almost like disappear, and extremely difficult for victims to get them served. So I remember having a lot of conversations, talking to survivors with a tremendous amount of frustration about getting the petition served. So what, other than Suzanne, who's figured it out by having Wayne, who is absolutely adorable, on site and determined to serve people in 12 hours or less, what are some of the others doing? So I'll start with you and then go to Catherine about how are you overcoming the service part? Have you discussed that, Diane, in your meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize when you said you meant me. My apologies.
Sorry.
We have brought this up with the sheriff's office recently about asking to allow victims to be able to do remotely the paperwork that the sheriffs require to serve. Because right now the process is the victim has to go to court, gets the temporary restraining order, and then has to go over to the sheriff's window and fill out more paperwork there to get the sheriffs to serve. So we have started that conversation. They have raised some concerns, which in my opinion, I think for victims who are working with DV agencies, we can overcome. I'm optimistic about that. But that conversation is beginning here. And in the past year, we also had a statute change that allowed some alternatives for service when a respondent was avoiding service. And in fact, with a local clinic, we were one of the first cases to get service in that alternative means. So that was a really exciting opportunity this past year.
So how did you serve them by alternative means?
We ended up doing US mail and then personal service where they were allowed to drop it on the doorstep.
Nice. So I think looking at some of our existing laws and best practices would help. So Catherine, I'm going to go to Catherine now. Catherine, how have you overcome the challenge of serving the respondents?
So our sheriff's office has a domestic violence unit that is their civil process unit. That unit is housed in the Family Justice Center. And when a survivor files, we made a slight modification during COVID just to reduce exposure, but they talk immediately to one of the sheriff's office deputies who are housed at the Family Justice Center. That's either in person or over the phone. And so they're doing an in-person interview to get all the additional details and information that you wouldn't get on a written order about locations to find the defendant, or where he could be, or where's his mama's house, or where does he work, or where does he hang out. They're doing a full detail. And then they typically make an attempt to service, obviously on the same day and sometimes by the end of the day. One of the neat things about electronic filing is as more counties in North Carolina come on board virtually, and we're all using the state administrative office of the court system, if you have a restraining order in another county, it also is noted, the sheriff's office in that county is notified electronically as well. So that information is easily pulled in what law enforcement, when they pull up their system, when they're pulling someone over or looking for someone or have an intersection with a potential defendant, they have access to that information. So the technology has really been used well to help with that service component.
Okay, sounds good. So I just have one more question for Diane. One of the things we were able to do, once we overcame that issue, is like, bring it on. We can like take on a next challenge. And so the next challenge after the service was, how are we going to get police reports attached to the restraining order right from the beginning? So what is San Diego doing? At one time, they were able to print out a copy of the police report for the victim who was seeking a restraining order in 15 minutes or less. Is that still happening?
So at the Family Justice Center, if a victim goes in there to get the paperwork to file for a temporary restraining order, yes, the Family Justice Center has a relationship with law enforcement where they can get a copy of that police report, and then if it's appropriate, they can attach it as an exhibit and lodge it with the court.
All right, fantastic. And I didn't ask all of you what's happening about police reports and evidence, but Suzanne, is there something in the works there?
Police reports are obtainable right here in the same building with us. And so clients are able to both obtain those and also file their citizen crime reports with us. Since we have so many jurisdictions we serve in the county, we have fax forms and scan forms that we're able to use with those law enforcement agencies. Our only hurdle really is that our administrative office of the courts at the state level still requires a wet signature for a lot of these documents. And so there is always some element of personal showing up someplace to file this particular document or to receive that particular document. So that's one of the hurdles we're finding, but people are able to get more information now than they ever have before.
Well, I'm surprised with that, because now electronic signature is acceptable for just about everything. So maybe, Suzanne, you're going to have to change the law.
Yes, that's one of the things we've been working on. Actually, about 5 years ago, the administrative order of the courts was ready to go electronic with every legal form that they were using, and there was money set aside at the state level to do that, but it didn't get spent, so the governor reappropriated it for something else, and we had to start back over at square one. So that's an ongoing process, but it's something that we're working really, really hard to remedy. And I think COVID gives us the perfect opportunity to do that, because we're penalizing our survivors more than we are other victims of other types of crime in terms of being able to receive and access justice services. So I think we can make the case that that's going to be something that we're going to look at going forward for statute change.
Thank you.
So, one more thing,
word there.
I do. One of the things that we've actually took this from strangulation training with Gail is the other thing that we are doing now with electronic filing when victims are coming in is we photograph injury when someone has injury, and we're using those photographs as part of the civil order in addition to the criminal process. And it's been a very powerful tool to have photos that when we take photos of the victim, particularly if the bruising is below the neck, that we can use those photographs as part of their emergency restraining order filing and for their permanent hearing. And those are just attachments to those records, which prior to e-filing and some of our other things around training and strangulation, we were not doing. And that has been very successful for survivors.
Okay, so not only police reports, all the evidence that you can collect from your forensic medical unit, which I know, Suzanne, you do have one as well with Kathy Bell, and she does a fantastic job. And both of you are doing really great work when it comes to that. And San Diego, of course, now has the forensic medical unit back up and running. And what I have heard from not Diane, but Tracy Pryor, that when you have the forensic nurse, yet another partner on site, that felony prosecution of strangulation cases has gone up by at least 40%. And the last time I talked to Tracy Pryor, just to brag about her, they were having a 97% conviction rate as a result of this amazing partnership, better reports, better documentation, less victims are recanting. So I think we've also made the business case of why people should have a family justice center. Only appropriate to ask Lisbeth, because as you know, we also started the Voices Committee in San Diego in 2003. And the reason why we started the Voices Committee was for so many, but one was to be our in-house focus group, that they could be our compass. They can always give us feedback. So Lisbeth, what would you like everyone to know?
First, I want to thank all these ladies that have done an amazing job to, help victims so much. I know you guys meet a lot of victims, but just for me, I want to thank you because I know how much this really impacts the life of a victim and their children if they have children.
Well, thank you, Lisbeth, and thank you to all of our presenters today. And I will say that there is a tremendous amount of power in voices in a survivor, because I found that when I went to meetings by myself, people would say no to me and there was no other witnesses. Then I found if I brought other partners with me, somebody from the domestic violence world or program like Verna Griffin Tabor from CCS, Lieutenant Jim Barker from the police department, Diane McGrogan from the hospital, it was much harder for them to say no to us. And then I found out the power of voices, survivors who were in a good place, a strong place to tell their story and share their courage. And no one has ever said no to you, Lisbeth, or our Voices members. So the thing I'm taking away from this is include those partners, include your Voices members, be patient, be determined. I used to call it gentle, relentless pressure. Never take no for an answer, and be creative. And I think I took that away too after having so many focus groups meetings. I think the one that I had right after we opened up from the San Diego Family Justice Center, we had our first focus group there. I asked the survivors who were in the room that night, what do you think? And the first survivor said to me, what took you so long? And I never, ever will forget that. I still get chills thinking about it. And if I was completely honest with her, there were all these hurdles. There were relationship hurdles, attitude hurdles, biases, and the list goes on and on. But we never gave up our dream of starting our Family Justice Center from 1988 to 2002. And when we do get to have focus groups with survivors before a Family Justice Center, they generally say, hurry up. So as we are now embarking on this particular time, I think the stars have aligned for us. COVID has given us a silver lining. People are realizing you can have these remote hearings, virtual hearings, e-filings, fax filings. And I think when the stars align, I've always said, let's shoot for the moon. So I say to all of us who are here, do not stop dreaming. Do not stop dreaming big. Keep pushing that envelope, expanding access to services, and what more can we do? So thank you all for joining us today. I believe we'll be having an opportunity to answer some questions. Well, I see a number of questions. Catherine, since I see you, I don't see the others right now. I'm going to just lean on you for a number of questions that have come in the chat. One question has to do with credibility and the challenge of assessing credibility if a survivor is wearing a mask. So I think this is actually a benefit of video conferencing and others. Can you share what's happening with respect to masks?
So in our center where we do electronic filing, it's in an individual room. So while we introduce the client and we're wearing a mask, the client is wearing a mask. Once the interaction with the judge starts, the client then removes their mask. So that is the benefit of electronic filing, is that the client can have privacy. The judge can see that individual. If there's anyone else in the room, which is really the biggest question we've had around credibility, is not around mask usage, and we've done hundreds of restraining orders virtually remotely since COVID. It's been around, is there other people in the room? So we make sure we have a really wide angle so the judge can see who else is in the room. And we've actually had advocates or support folks for clients not be present during this time, so that there's not another professional in the room, which would require everyone wearing a mask, the clients in the room by themselves.
Okay. So the next question, since COVID, it continues, what challenges, if any, have you had with service of the, the emergency protection order or different notices of hearings?
So in our county, the sheriff's office facilitates that process. And they are in our county, our orders are typically heard in the morning hours or by 2 o'clock. So the sheriff's office initiates that process of service in the afternoon. And it's not been impacted. They have not reported a decrease in the ability to do service. We have had quite a bit of challenges in our community where the courts have had to close due to COVID outbreaks and creating a response. But the benefit of remote filing for us and the benefit of having a family justice center is, as a collaborative, we work really well together to help navigate that. So if courts are going to be closed, services impacted, families coming through the Family Justice Center, we have their contact information, their phone number, that type of thing. So we're able to coordinate with them. So we have not seen a significant impact to the ability to serve those restraining orders, even with COVID going on.
Okay. Last question for you. With respect to the second hearing, the permanent restraining order hearing, and COVID still going, what has happened in North Carolina to make the courtroom accessible without being exposed or being threatened or harassed by an abuser?
So we had some challenges with that at first, because in our courtrooms, the bailiffs were keeping the plaintiffs and the defendants in the hallway and only letting a limited number of folks into the courtroom for that return hearing. But we talked with our district court judge, sheriff's office, clerk's office partners, and navigated some different check-in processes for how victims would be placed and seated in the courtroom and keeping defendants separate. We actually also can allow victims, our Family Justice Center is just across the street from the courthouse, so they can sit there. They've done some staggered hearings to space out how cases are being heard throughout the morning, so not everyone's checking in at the same time. And we added additional advocates and additional support staff over there to kind of help support that process so clients don't feel alone, and also trying to mitigate any type of interaction that could potentially happen.
Fantastic. And I was just forwarded a copy of what North Carolina has actually put out with respect to COVID-19 remote hearing resource for domestic violence matters. It's a pretty cool document. So we will be attaching it so everybody has access to it. And it looks like in quite a lot of thought has gone into it about how to have hearings through WebEx. So I know different jurisdictions will use different formats. I've seen Zoom, WebEx, BlueJeans. So have you had the opportunity to hold one of those hearings yourself? Is it happening from your Family Justice Center? If you could share a little more.
Sure. So we were already doing remote filing before COVID. So we've been doing that since our Family Justice Center opened. We were the second county in the state to initiate that process. Our state administrative office of the courts has done a lot of work on helping communities do remote filing for emergency ex parte orders. And with COVID, there was a lot of advocacy at the state and many local areas, particularly for more rural communities, on how to do remote-based hearings. So could a survivor do that from their home? We've not done that in Guilford County, even though our judicial
bench is open to that. We want to make sure even if someone is impacted directly by COVID and needs access to safety planning and emergency order, they can receive that. But there are counties who went to full remote services, so offering pathways to allow survivors to still file for restraining orders, which is really why the toolkit was designed, no matter how large your county was and what that resource looked like, making sure that there were pathways for filing, particularly for that emergency protective order, so that people can get what they need as quickly as possible.
Fantastic, Catherine. And looks like from reading that document, your 14 counties have already adopted it. If that doesn't give you hope, I don't know what. So how many counties do you have in North Carolina? Because I'm assuming the goal is all counties.
So we're at 50 counties in 100 counties, a lot of counties in North Carolina. So there's still a lot of work in that. You know, it's interesting. Somebody asked the question about credibility, and some communities, our judges have said, we don't want virtual. We don't want that video conferencing opportunity. We want a chance to be able to sit down with the survivor and have that face-to-face conversation and see that as an opportunity for support. In other communities where they don't have the established collaboratives like we have with our Family Justice Center, and there's about 11 counties somewhere in the process of establishing a Family Justice Center right now in North Carolina. We've got a lot of momentum in that type of coordinated care, where there's strong collaboration and simple, easier pathways to working with these various partners. In the more rural communities, I think the goal with our administrative officer of our courts and some of our rural counties is just making sure that there is access, because access is a challenge, and we know COVID has created a whole nother layer of challenges in our community.
All right. Well, thank you, Catherine. I'm going to turn now to Janine, who's joining us from Tulsa, Oklahoma at your Family Justice Center. So Janine, I'm going to ask you the same questions. How has the issue of credibility come up, if it has at all, with respect to maybe survivors having a mask? Any complaints about the inability to judge credibility? How are you addressing the mask issue?
To my knowledge, we have not had any issues come up with the mask. I think folks here are very willing to use it because we do have really high COVID numbers. They're in the courts, they're taking people's temperatures before they walk in if they have to make an appearance in court. When they enter the Family Justice Center, we're doing the same. We're also asking questions about COVID that the nurses created for us and taking folks' temperatures. And I think to this point, those have served us well. Suzanne prepared our center very well for COVID, and we have had a few people who have been exposed, but oddly enough, it's been through family members and outside of work. None of our survivors have had an issue with wearing it. I will say the way we have our area sectioned off in cubicles is not the most attractive, because we put up plastic shower curtains between folks so we could spray them and clean the areas really well. But it has served us well. Suzanne has been very fastidious about that, and about us taking our temperatures and wearing masks, and clients as well when they come in. So no, we haven't had anybody complain about it at all.
Well, and thank you both for keeping your Family Justice Center open and available to survivors. I know everybody is being creative and innovative when it comes to providing services, because now more than ever, I think survivors definitely need to be able to go someplace to know that help is available. So Janine, I'm also going to ask you, have you seen any challenges with serving respondents with their restraining orders since COVID?
Well, no, because we have Wayne. Wayne is amazing, and Wayne, when he does retire, is training Mary. And we have not, one piece of information that we were forgetting or that was not being relayed from our DV provider within the packets was the, sorry, I'm blanking, it was information about the offender and his location. And that was a problem at first. but then we discovered where the information drop was. Wayne, of course, good old Wayne, figured all that out, and he got it rectified, and we haven't had really any issues since. They are very, they take it very seriously, and they work to get the offenders served. So no, we have not had any issues.
Fantastic. And I was impressed with Wayne when I first met him many years ago. It's going to be a really sad day when he retires. I mean, good for him, but I just don't know anyone else who would go out of their way like Wayne did to serve their offenders to increase victim safety. So I'm going to ask you the last question, and then we're going to go to Lizbeth. Permanent hearings. Have you been able to tackle that one in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
So the permanent hearings are still happening through BlueJean. The emergency are happening through BlueJean as well, unless there are there's excessive evidence. So as far as the criminal and misdemeanor DV dockets, they are doing those in person. They started doing those in person again, I don't know, maybe about a month, 2 months ago. But I don't, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. So it sounds like people are making good use of technology to have those hearings in court. And it looks like for the people that are listening in, North Carolina did a really good job of coming up with a nice protocol on how to get consent to have remote hearings, how it's going to be handled, how to enhance victim safety, how it's going to be conducted, recorded, and they even have a section about confidentiality as well. So I think that is definitely a go-to document that everyone should review. We're also going to be attaching the Ventura document, how they were able to expand services. And the last point that I want to make before we go to Lizbeth is that I did find a document which we're going to add as well that talks about survivors' concern about wearing a mask, especially a victim who may have been strangled or suffocated. That inability to breathe could cause some issues relating to wearing a mask, and maybe, I didn't even think of this, a barrier of going to court if they have to wear a mask to go to court. So we will share that. That was developed by our friends in Ohio, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So Lizbeth, as we wrap up, has anything new happened in the last couple of months with survivors having access to the court, or maybe even the mask? I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to some survivors recently about access to the court. If you can share anything new or any final comments.
Yeah, so currently in San Diego, victims still have to go to court to file for an emergency restraining order. And of course, there's that challenge of the pandemic at this moment, but still, many victims still go to court and file for that restraining order. The good thing about it is that now they're having video court hearings. So now victims can actually don't have to go to court physically. They can just log in with GoTeams. They're using the GoTeams app to have those virtual court hearings. So that's been helpful for many, but it's also been a challenge for those victims who have no knowledge on how to use the computer or their phone to access these apps. So I think right now what they're working on is to have some partners, some organizations or family justice centers to have a room in the family justice center where victims can have all those tools and support for them to just attend their court hearing virtually. But that's my knowledge as of how things are working right now in San Diego. So it just depends on the background of the victim. and their knowledge on how to use a computer and their phone. Many of them still need a lot of support.
That's a very good point, Lisbeth, and thank you for bringing that up. So as we wrap up, I'm also thinking that the attendees might go, my judge wants to talk to your judge, Catherine, in North Carolina. Who should they contact? And the same thing with you, Janine. Who should they contact? Because I think sometimes a phone call from judge to judge can really open up a pathway. So Catherine, who's your go-to judge?
Our Chief District Court Judge, Judge Teresa Vincent, it would be my go-to person to navigate all of these things we're discussing.
Okay, great. Maybe you can let them know that people might be calling. That might be a good idea. Or maybe we have a follow-up with the judges next time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Janine, who's your go-to judge that somebody might call?
That would be Judge LaFortune.
Okay. Thank you. And if you do have a number that you can send us, if anybody wants to contact Riley at the Alliance, we will help facilitate contacting individuals to really make this happen. Because I think we got to move fast. Survivors need access to the courtroom as quickly as possible. When they call, we need to be there to help them because they are navigating all kinds of challenges. And what I've learned over and over again is when they call, when they come in, when they need your help, we've got to be there and we've got to move fast. Well, ladies, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us and your voices and continuing to provide leadership and support for so many people. I feel absolutely inspired and hopeful. I think I'm going to go back to everybody's doing it or should do it, and shame on you if you're not doing it. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. And maybe we will do a follow-up depending on the evaluations or comments, because I think it would be nice to hear from the judges as well. So thank you, friends, and please give Wayne a big hug for us, that we haven't forgotten him and absolutely love what he's doing.
I will. Thanks. Thank you all.
Bye, friends.
Yeah.
See you at the Leadership Institute.